In the Grand Theatre
You will
of
do great
Westminster Abbey,
things,
where kings have been
as I
crowned for
know you
nearly
will.
1,000 years, something extraordinary was about to unfold that would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. As millions watched around the world, expecting the usual pageantry and centuries-old traditions, no one could have predicted that Prince William would break from script in such a profound way that it would bring his father, the newly crowned King Charles III, to tears before the entire world. This wasn't just another royal ceremony captured by cameras. This was the moment when a son's love transcended the weight of crowns, when genuine human emotion pierced through the armor of royal duty, and when a single gesture would redefine what it truly means to be part of the House of Windsor. What happened in those sacred walls would echo far beyond that May morning, touching hearts across continents, and reminding us all that beneath the titles, the jewels, and the ancient rituals, the most powerful force in any family remains unchanged: the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. The story you're about to discover reveals not just what happened that day, but why it mattered so deeply to both men, and how one spontaneous moment of authentic love changed the course of their relationship forever. The morning of May 6th, 2023, dawned crisp and clear over London, as if the heavens themselves had conspired to provide the perfect backdrop for one of the most significant days in British history. Westminster Abbey stood majestically against the pale sky, its ancient stones having witnessed the coronation of 40 monarchs over the past 9 centuries. Today, it would witness the crowning of King Charles III, a man who had waited 74 years for this moment. Inside Clarence House, Prince William stood before his mirror, adjusting the ceremonial uniform that would mark him as the heir to the throne his father was about to officially claim. The red tunic of the Welsh Guards, adorned with its distinctive gold braiding, felt heavier than usual this morning, not because of its physical weight, but because of everything it represented. Today, his father would become king, and William would formally step into his role as the direct heir to the throne of England. The relationship between Charles and William had been complex, shaped by decades of public scrutiny, personal tragedies, and the unique pressures of royal life. As a young boy, William had watched his parents' marriage crumble under the intense glare of media attention. He had seen his father struggle with the weight of expectations, caught between duty to the crown and his own desires for personal happiness. The divorce of Charles and Diana in 1996 had created a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge, with William and his brother Harry often caught in the middle. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 had been the defining trauma of William's youth. At just 15 years old, he had walked behind his mother's coffin, his face a mask of composure that belied the turmoil within. In those dark months that followed, it was his father who had stepped forward, not just as the Prince of Wales, but as a man desperately trying to help his sons navigate their grief. Charles had arranged for counselors, had spent countless hours talking with his boys, and had gradually begun to rebuild the fractured bonds of their family. The healing had been slow and sometimes painful. There were years when William struggled to understand his father's choices, when the young prince questioned whether duty should always come before personal happiness. Charles, for his part, had wrestled with guilt over his failed first marriage and the impact it had on his children. He had tried to be the father he wished he'd had, while simultaneously preparing to be the king his mother expected him to become. As William grew older and began his own military service, he started to see his father differently. Charles wasn't just the man who had caused his mother pain. He was also someone who had dedicated his entire life to service, who had championed environmental causes decades before they became mainstream, and who had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy. William began to understand that his father's journey hadn't been easy, that being heir to the throne came with sacrifices that most people could never comprehend. The turning point in their relationship had come when William married Catherine Middleton in 2011. Charles had embraced Kate as a daughter, welcoming her into the family with genuine warmth. He had seen how happy she made his son and had supported their relationship from the beginning, even when some critics questioned whether a commoner was suitable for a future king. As William and Kate started their own family, Charles had transformed into a devoted grandfather, delighting in his role as grandpapa to Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Now, as William prepared for the coronation, he reflected on how far their relationship had come. His father was about to achieve the role he had been preparing for his entire life, and William felt a profound mixture of pride, responsibility, and, yes, love for the man who would soon wear the crown of England. The morning routine at Clarence House was carefully orchestrated, with every detail planned to the minute. William's children were also preparing for their roles in the ceremony. Prince George, now 9 years old, would serve as one of the pages of honor, a role that carried both privilege and pressure for such a young boy. Charlotte and Louis would attend as observers, their first major royal ceremony since their great-grandmother's funeral the previous year. Catherine moved through the house with her characteristic grace, ensuring that every detail was perfect while also managing the natural excitement and nervousness of 3 young children about to participate in a historic event. She had become the anchor that kept their family grounded, helping William navigate the complexities of royal life while maintaining some semblance of normalcy for their children. As the family prepared to leave for Westminster Abbey, William took a moment to gather his thoughts. Today wasn't just about ceremony and tradition. It was about his father finally receiving the recognition he deserved after decades of dedicated service. Charles had been preparing for this role longer than anyone in British history, and William wanted the day to be perfect for him. The journey to Westminster Abbey was a blur of waving crowds and security escorts. London had been transformed for the occasion, with thousands of people lining the streets despite the early hour. British flags fluttered from every available space, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. For many, this would be the only coronation they would witness in their lifetimes. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was reverent yet charged with excitement. Representatives from around the world had gathered to witness this historic moment, and the ancient building hummed with quiet conversation in dozens of languages. The Gothic architecture seemed to amplify the significance of the occasion, with centuries of history embedded in every stone and carved detail. William took his place among the congregation, his uniform immaculate, his bearing dignified. But beneath the composed exterior, his mind was racing with memories of all the moments that had led to this day. He thought of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose death the previous year had set these events in motion. She had been a constant in their lives, the steady presence who had guided the monarchy through decades of change. Her absence was deeply felt today, even as her son prepared to carry on her legacy. The ceremony began with the traditional procession, each element carefully choreographed and steeped in meaning that stretched back centuries. As Charles entered the Abbey, resplendent in his ceremonial robes, William felt a surge of emotion that caught him off guard. This was his father, the man he had sometimes struggled to understand, about to be crowned King of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury's voice echoed through the ancient building as the sacred rituals began. Each prayer, each blessing, each symbolic gesture carried the weight of 1,000 years of British history. William watched as his father participated in ceremonies that had remained largely unchanged since the Middle Ages, connecting him to an unbroken line of monarchs stretching back through the centuries. As the ceremony progressed, William found himself reflecting on the unique burden his father was accepting. To be king meant to put duty before personal desires, to serve the nation and the Commonwealth with unwavering dedication, and to carry the hopes and expectations of millions of people. It was a responsibility that few could truly understand, and fewer still could bear with grace. The moment of crowning was approaching, the climax of a ceremony that had taken years to plan and centuries to perfect. The St. Edward's crown, crafted in 1661, was brought forward, its gold surface gleaming under the Abbey's lights. This crown had been placed on the heads of monarchs for over 3 centuries, and Now it would rest upon Charles's head, officially making him king. William watched with intense focus as the archbishop lifted the crown, preparing to place it on his father's head. In that moment, the weight of history, family legacy, and personal emotion all converged. This was the moment his father had been preparing for his entire life, and William was about to witness the culmination of that journey. The crown was placed upon Charles's head with solemn ceremony, and officially, Charles Philip Arthur George became King Charles III. The congregation responded with "God Save the King," their voices echoing through the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey. William's voice was among them, strong and clear, pledging his loyalty not just as heir to the throne, but as a son supporting his father in his greatest moment of triumph. But even as the official ceremonies continued, William was already planning something that would make this day even more meaningful for his father. Something that would show not just royal protocol, but genuine human emotion. Something that would demonstrate that beneath all the pageantry and tradition, this was ultimately a story about family, love, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. The foundation for what would become the most memorable moment of the day was being laid, not in the ancient traditions of the monarchy, but in the very modern understanding that sometimes the most powerful gestures come straight from the heart, unscripted and authentic. William was about to prove that the most important crown any man can wear is the love and respect of his children. The official coronation ceremony had concluded with magnificent pageantry, but the day was far from over. As the newly crowned king, Charles III processed through Westminster Abbey, acknowledging the blessings and cheers of the congregation, William felt a complex mix of emotions washing over him. Pride, certainly, but also a profound sense of the magnitude of change that had just occurred. His father was now king, and with that transformation came a new dynamic in their relationship that would define the rest of their lives. The transition from the Abbey to the traditional balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace was orchestrated with military precision. Every moment had been planned, every gesture rehearsed, every detail scrutinized for its symbolic meaning. But as William made his way through the carefully choreographed post-ceremony activities, his mind kept returning to a conversation he had with his father just 3 weeks earlier. They had been walking through the gardens at Highgrove House, Charles's beloved country estate, discussing the final preparations for the coronation. It was one of those rare moments when they could speak as father and son without the weight of royal protocol dictating every word. Charles had opened up about his feelings regarding the approaching ceremony, admitting to nervousness that surprised William with its vulnerability. "You know, William," Charles had said, pausing by a patch of wildflowers he had planted years earlier, "I've been preparing for this moment my entire life. But now that it's here, I find myself thinking less about the crown and more about whether I can truly fill the void your grandmother left behind." The admission had struck William deeply. His father, who had always seemed so assured in his royal duties, was revealing doubts that made him seem more human, more relatable. Charles continued, "I keep thinking about all the mistakes I've made, the times I wasn't the father I should have been, especially during those difficult years after your mother's death. I wonder if I'm worthy of the trust that comes with this role." William had been moved by his father's honesty, but also troubled by the burden of guilt Charles still carried. That evening, he had called Catherine to discuss the conversation, and together they had talked about ways to show Charles that he was not just ready for kingship, but deeply loved and supported by his family. Now, as the royal family prepared for the balcony appearance that would mark the public conclusion of the coronation festivities, William thought about that conversation and the plan that had been forming in his mind ever since. The traditional balcony appearance was usually a formal affair, with the royal family waving to the crowds below in a carefully arranged formation. But William wanted to do something different, something that would show the world the genuine affection and respect he held for his father. The crowds outside Buckingham Palace had been gathering since dawn, and their enthusiasm was infectious. Hundreds of thousands of people filled the mall and the area around the palace, many having camped overnight to secure the best viewing positions. The sea of red, white, and blue flags created a patriotic tapestry that stretched as far as the eye could see, while the sound of singing and cheering filled the air. Inside the palace, the royal family gathered in the staterooms, taking a few moments to decompress from the intensity of the morning ceremony. Prince George was still wearing his Page of Honor uniform, clearly proud of his role in the historic event, but also visibly relieved that his formal duties were complete. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis were animated with excitement, their young voices adding a note of joyful chaos to the otherwise formal atmosphere. Charles moved through the room with the ease of someone who had finally stepped fully into his destiny. The St. Edward's crown had been replaced with the lighter imperial state crown for the public appearance, but the transformation in his bearing was unmistakable. He was no longer the heir apparent. He was the king, and the weight of that reality was settling around him like a familiar cloak. Catherine watched William closely as the family prepared for the balcony appearance. She could see the intensity in her husband's expression, the way his jaw was set with determination. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was planning something significant, and she squeezed his hand reassuringly as they lined up for the procession to the balcony. "Whatever you're planning," she whispered quietly, "it's the right thing to do." William smiled at her understanding, grateful once again for a wife who could read his intentions so clearly. The plan he had been developing wasn't complicated in its execution, but it carried enormous emotional weight. It would require him to break from the traditional protocol of royal appearances, to act from the heart rather than from the script, and to do something that would surprise not just the public, but his father as well. The moment arrived with the opening of the balcony doors. The roar from the crowd below was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. The newly crowned king stepped forward first, and the cheering intensified to an almost impossible level. This was the moment the British people had been waiting for, their first official view of King Charles III in his new role. The traditional formation called for the immediate family to arrange themselves in a line behind the king, creating the perfect tableau for photographers and the millions watching on television around the world. Charles stood at the center, with Camilla, now queen consort, beside him. William, as heir to the throne, was positioned to his father's right, with Catherine and their children completing the primary grouping. As they waved to the crowds, William observed his father closely. Charles was clearly moved by the reception from the public, his eyes bright with emotion as he looked out over the sea of supporters. The king raised his hand in the traditional royal wave, acknowledging the cheers with the dignity and grace that had been instilled in him from childhood. But William noticed something else in his father's expression, something that took him back to that conversation at Highgrove House. Despite the triumph of the day and the overwhelming support from the crowds below, there was still a hint of uncertainty in Charles's eyes, a subtle vulnerability that only someone who knew him intimately would recognize. The RAF fly past was approaching, with over 60 aircraft scheduled to thunder overhead in tribute to the new monarch. The timing had to be perfect, and William knew that his moment was coming. As the distant sound of approaching aircraft began to reach their ears, he made his decision. What happened next would be discussed and analyzed for years to come, replayed in news broadcasts and social media posts around the world. William stepped forward, moving closer to his father, and in a gesture that was completely spontaneous and utterly authentic, he placed his hand on Charles's shoulder and leaned in close. The words he spoke were audible only to his father, lost in the roar of the crowd and the approaching aircraft. But the cameras captured the moment perfectly. The heir to the throne, breaking protocol to offer what appeared to be words of encouragement and love to his newly crowned father. Charles's reaction was immediate and profound. His composed, royal expression cracked, and for just a moment, the carefully maintained facade of kingly dignity gave way to raw human emotion. Tears welled in his eyes as he turned toward William, and The two men shared a brief, but powerful moment of connection that transcended their public roles. The gesture lasted only seconds, but its impact was electric. The crowd, initially puzzled by the break in protocol, seemed to sense the emotional significance of what they were witnessing. The cheering took on a different quality, more personal and heartfelt, as if the entire crowd had been allowed a glimpse into a private family moment. Catherine watched with tears in her own eyes, understanding the significance of what her husband had just done. This wasn't just a son supporting his father. It was William officially releasing Charles from the guilt and uncertainty he had carried for so long, giving him the blessing he needed to step fully into his role as king. The aircraft roared overhead in perfect formation, their precision and power creating a spectacular conclusion to the coronation celebrations. But for those who had witnessed William's gesture, the mechanical precision of the flypast paled in comparison to the genuine human emotion they had just observed. As the last aircraft disappeared into the distance, and the family prepared to return inside the palace, Charles caught William's arm, pulling him aside from the others. The conversation that followed was private, conducted in whispers as the crowd continued to cheer below, but the emotional weight of it was clear to anyone watching. Years of complex family dynamics, unspoken regrets, and carefully controlled royal emotions came to the surface in that moment. It was a conversation that had been decades in the making, a final resolution to questions that had haunted both men for years. The day that had begun with ancient ceremony and traditional pageantry was transformed by one spontaneous gesture of love between a father and son. William's decision to break protocol and speak from his heart had created a moment that would define not just the coronation, but the future of their relationship and the monarchy itself. As they finally stepped back inside Buckingham Palace, both men had been changed by the experience. Charles was now truly king, not just in title, but in the confidence and support he felt from his family. And William had demonstrated that the future of the monarchy lay not just in maintaining tradition, but in the ability to show authentic human emotion when it mattered most. The private conversation between Charles and William inside Buckingham Palace was a watershed moment that would reshape their relationship forever. Away from the crowds and cameras, father and son found themselves in the blue drawing room, a space that had witnessed countless historic conversations over the centuries. The weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air, but it was the lighter, more personal atmosphere that struck both men as they finally had a moment to process what had just occurred. Charles had removed the imperial state crown and set it carefully on a side table, the precious jewels catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. For the first time since early morning, he looked relaxed, the formal posture of kingship giving way to the more familiar bearing of the father. William had also loosened his ceremonial uniform, and in the soft afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, they looked less like king and heir and more like two men who shared a profound bond. "William," Charles began, his voice thick with emotion, "what you did out there, those words you spoke, I need you to know how much they meant to me." The conversation that followed would remain private between them, but its effects were immediately apparent to everyone who knew them well. Catherine, watching from across the room as she helped Charlotte and Louis with their formal clothes, saw her husband's shoulders relax in a way she hadn't witnessed in months. The tension that had been building as the coronation approached seemed to dissolve in the space between father and son. What William had whispered to his father on the balcony had been simple, but profound. "You've already proven yourself worthy of this crown through everything you've overcome to get here. I'm proud to call you both my father and my king." These words, spoken in the heat of an emotionally charged moment, had cut through decades of complicated family history and given Charles the validation he had been seeking not just from his people, but from his children. The aftermath of the balcony gesture rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. Within hours, video clips of the moment were circulating globally, with royal commentators and ordinary viewers alike trying to interpret what they had witnessed. The body language experts had their analysis, The lip readers offered their interpretations, but the real significance of the gesture was something that could only be understood by those who knew the complex history of the relationship between Charles and William. Social media exploded with reactions to the moment. Hashtag William and Charles began trending worldwide, with millions of people sharing their thoughts on what they had observed. Many saw it as evidence of the monarchy's ability to evolve and show genuine emotion in public. Others interpreted it as a sign of the strong family bonds that would ensure the institution's future stability. Royal watchers noted that it was a departure from the traditionally stoic public appearances that had characterized royal events for generations. In the days that followed the coronation, the significance of William's gesture became even more apparent as details began to emerge about the careful planning that had gone into every other aspect of the day. The realization that this moment had been completely spontaneous, unscripted, and unplanned made it all the more powerful in the eyes of the public and the media. Foreign dignitaries who had attended the ceremony spoke privately about the warmth they had observed between father and son, with many commenting that it boded well for the future of the British monarchy. President Macron of France later remarked to his aides that the moment had reminded him why the British royal family continued to command respect around the world, noting that their ability to show authentic emotion while maintaining dignity was something that political leaders could learn from. The impact on Charles was perhaps the most significant change of all. In the weeks following the coronation, those closest to the king noticed a transformation in his bearing and confidence. The hesitation and self-doubt that had occasionally surfaced in private conversations seemed to have evaporated. Palace staff reported that Charles appeared more relaxed in his new role, more willing to make decisions without the lengthy consultations that had sometimes characterized his approach as heir apparent. The relationship between Charles and William also entered a new phase in the months following the coronation. Their working relationship, which had always been professional and cordial, became notably warmer and more collaborative. Palace insiders noted that their weekly meetings, previously formal affairs focused strictly on royal duties, began to include more personal conversation and genuine consultation about the future direction of the monarchy. William's role as heir apparent took on new dimensions as well. Charles began involving his son more directly in major decisions, seeking his counsel on everything from charitable patronages to diplomatic initiatives. The gesture on Coronation Day had demonstrated William's maturity and emotional intelligence in a way that formal training never could have, earning him his father's trust and respect in a completely new way. The impact extended to the next generation as well. Prince George, who had played his role as page of honor with remarkable composure, spoke to his parents afterward about what he had observed. At 9 years old, he was beginning to understand the significance of his place in the line of succession, and the example set by his father's gesture to his grandfather provided a powerful lesson about the importance of family support within the royal framework. Catherine's role in supporting both her husband's decision and the broader family dynamic was quietly acknowledged by those within royal circles. Her steady influence had helped William develop the emotional confidence to act spontaneously on such a significant occasion, and her presence on the balcony had provided a stabilizing force for the entire family during a moment of high emotion. The media coverage in the weeks following the coronation consistently returned to the balcony moment as a defining image of the day. Unlike many royal events where the pageantry and ceremony dominated discussion, the human element of William's gesture had captured public imagination in a way that surprised even experienced royal correspondents. Royal biographers began to reassess the narrative of Charles and William's relationship in light of what they had witnessed. Previous accounts had often focused on the tensions and challenges that had marked their father-son dynamic, particularly during the difficult period following Diana's death. The coronation gesture suggested that those challenges had not just been overcome, but had actually strengthened their bond in unexpected ways. The gesture also had implications for the broader perception of the monarchy's relevance in a modern world. At a time when many questioned whether ancient institutions could remain meaningful in contemporary society, the display of genuine human emotion and family support struck a chord with people across generational and cultural lines. International royal families took note as well. The Swedish royal family, through private channels, expressed admiration for the way the British royals had managed to maintain formality while allowing for authentic emotional expression. Similar sentiments were echoed by other European monarchies, who saw the coronation as an example of how tradition and modernity could coexist successfully. The religious leaders who had participated in the coronation ceremony also reflected on the significance of the moment. The Archbishop of Canterbury later observed that the gesture had embodied the spiritual values of love, forgiveness, and family that were central to the ceremony's deeper meaning, noting that it had transformed what could have been merely a constitutional ritual into something approaching a spiritual experience. As summer progressed and the immediate excitement of the coronation began to settle into memory, the long-term implications of William's gesture became clearer. Palace officials noted that the public's perception of both Charles and William had shifted in positive ways, with approval ratings for both men reaching levels not seen in years. The gesture had also established a new template for how the royal family might handle public appearances in the future. While maintaining the dignity and formality that their roles required, there was now precedent for allowing genuine emotion to show through when appropriate. This balance between tradition and authenticity would become a hallmark of Charles's reign. Perhaps most importantly, the moment had demonstrated that the greatest strength of the monarchy lay not in its ancient ceremonies or constitutional powers, but in the human relationships that sustained it. The crown might symbolize authority and tradition, but it was love, respect, and mutual support that gave those symbols their true power. As autumn approached and the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death drew near, both Charles and William found themselves better equipped to honor her legacy while forging their own path forward. The coronation had marked not just Charles's official beginning as king, but the start of a new chapter in the relationship between father and son that would define the monarchy for generations to come. 6 months after the coronation, the full impact of William's spontaneous gesture was still reverberating through the royal family and beyond. The autumn of 2023 brought with it a series of events that would test the new dynamic between father and son and demonstrate just how profoundly that moment on the balcony had changed their relationship. The first major test came with the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death in September. This would be Charles's first time marking the somber occasion as king rather than as a grieving son, and the emotional weight of the day presented unique challenges. William took the lead in organizing a private family gathering at Balmoral Castle, the Scottish estate where his grandmother had died peacefully the year before. The family assembled in the same drawing room where they had received the news of Elizabeth's passing, but the atmosphere this time was markedly different. Charles spoke about his mother's legacy with a confidence and peace that had been absent in the immediate aftermath of her death. William watched his father with pride, recognizing that the man who had once questioned his worthiness to wear the crown was now speaking with the authority and wisdom of a king who had found his place. During that weekend at Balmoral, Charles and William took long walks through the estate's sprawling grounds, continuing conversations that had begun on Coronation Day. These walks became a tradition, a time when they could speak freely about the challenges of royal life, the future of the monarchy, and their hopes for the next generation. It was during one of these walks that Charles made a confession that surprised even William. "You know, son, I realize now that I spent so many years worrying about being worthy of the crown that I forgot the crown was already worthy of me. Your gesture at the coronation helped me understand that the monarchy isn't about perfection. It's about service, growth, and the courage to be vulnerable when necessary." This conversation marked another turning point in their relationship. William began to see his father not just as someone who had overcome personal challenges to become king, but as a man who was actively working to redefine what kingship could mean in the 21st century. Charles's willingness to acknowledge his own growth and vulnerability created space for William to express his own concerns about his future role. The professional collaboration between father and son also deepened significantly. Charles began including William in high-level meetings with government officials, foreign diplomats, and key figures from the Commonwealth. These weren't ceremonial inclusions, but genuine consultations where William's opinions were sought and valued. Palace staff noted that the dynamic between them during these meetings was notably different from the more formal interactions they had observed in previous years. One particularly significant moment came during a state visit from the President of South Africa in October. As they prepared for the formal dinner, Charles asked William to take the lead in the conversation about climate change initiatives, recognizing his son's passion and expertise in environmental issues. William's presentation was so well received that it became a template for future engagements, with father and son often tag-teaming diplomatic conversations in ways that showcased both their individual strengths and their collaborative relationship. The impact on William's own family was equally profound. Catherine observed that her husband seemed more relaxed and confident in his royal role, no longer carrying the weight of uncertainty about his relationship with his father. This confidence translated into his interactions with their children, particularly with Prince George, who was beginning to ask more sophisticated questions about his future role in the royal family. William found himself able to speak about the monarchy with genuine enthusiasm when talking to George, drawing on the positive examples set by his grandfather's successful transition to kingship. The anxiety that had sometimes crept into discussions about royal responsibility was replaced by a sense of purpose and continuity that made the future seem less daunting and more meaningful. The public continued to respond positively to the change dynamic between Charles and William. Polling data showed that approval ratings for the monarchy had reached their highest levels in over a decade, with particular increases among younger demographics who had previously been skeptical about the institution's relevance. Royal commentators attributed this shift largely to the perception that the family was more authentic and emotionally accessible than in previous generations. International recognition of this transformation came in unexpected ways. Harvard University invited both Charles and William to participate in a joint symposium on leadership and emotional intelligence in institutional settings. The invitation specifically cited the coronation moment as an example of how traditional institutions could embrace authentic human connection without sacrificing dignity or authority. The symposium, held via video link from Windsor Castle, became a landmark event in academic discussions about modern monarchy. Charles spoke about the importance of vulnerability in leadership, while William discussed the role of emotional intelligence in institutional change. Their easy rapport and mutual respect were evident throughout the session, providing a powerful example of how personal relationships could strengthen rather than undermine formal hierarchies. Back home, the gesture continued to influence how the royal family approached public engagements. During a visit to a children's hospital in November, William spontaneously hugged a young patient who had asked if he missed his mother. The moment, captured by photographers, was seen as evidence that the royal family's increased emotional openness was becoming a genuine part of their public persona rather than a one-time event. Charles, observing the positive reception to his son's spontaneous display of empathy, began incorporating more unscripted moments into his own public appearances. During a visit to flood-affected communities in northern England, the king abandoned his prepared remarks to sit with an elderly couple who had lost their home, listening to their story with evident compassion and offering comfort that went beyond formal condolences. These moments of authentic human connection began to define what royal watchers termed the new style of monarchy. It wasn't a departure from the dignity and service that had always characterized the institution, but rather an enhancement of those qualities through the addition of emotional transparency and genuine human empathy. The impact extended to other members of the royal family as well. Princess, and known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties, commented privately to friends that she had been moved by the changes she observed in both her brother and nephew. Even the traditionally reserved Prince Edward began to show more warmth in his public interactions, influenced by the family's new openness. As Christmas approached, and the royal family prepared for their traditional gathering at Sandringham, the transformation in Charles and William's relationship was perhaps most evident in the informal family moments. Palace staff reported overhearing laughter and animated conversation between father and son in ways that hadn't been observed in previous years. The Christmas Day service at Sandringham Church provided another opportunity for public observation of the family dynamic. As they walked together to the service, Charles and William were deep in conversation, their body language relaxed and natural. When a small child in the crowd called out, "Happy Christmas, King Charles," both men smiled and waved together, their synchronized response suggesting a partnership that had evolved far beyond formal protocol. During the Christmas broadcast, Charles made specific mention of the importance of family support in his first year as king, though he was too discreet to reference the coronation moment directly. However, those who knew the story understood the significance of his words. The strength of our institutions lies not in their ancient ceremonies, but in the human relationships that sustain them. I have been blessed to experience that truth in the most profound way this year. As the first anniversary of the coronation approached, plans began for a more intimate celebration that would focus on family rather than state pageantry. William suggested a private service of Thanksgiving at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, where they could reflect on the year's journey without the pressure of global media attention. The gesture on the balcony had been a single moment lasting mere seconds, but its impact had transformed not just a relationship between father and son, but the very nature of how the British monarchy presented itself to the world. It had proven that strength could come through vulnerability, that tradition could be enhanced by authenticity, and that the most powerful gestures were often the simplest ones, born from love rather than protocol. As they looked toward the future, both Charles and William carried with them the knowledge that their relationship had been tested and strengthened in the most public way possible. The crown that Charles wore was no longer a burden inherited from the past, but a trust shared with a son who had proven his love, loyalty, and readiness to carry the monarchy forward into a new era of authentic leadership and genuine human connection. As the first anniversary of King Charles III's coronation approached in May 2024, the transformation that had begun with William's spontaneous gesture had evolved into something far more significant than anyone could have anticipated. What had started as a single moment of authentic emotion between father and son had fundamentally altered not just their personal relationship, but the entire trajectory of the modern British monarchy. The anniversary itself was marked by a private service at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, as William had suggested months earlier. Unlike the grand spectacle of the previous year's ceremony, this gathering was intimate and reflective, attended only by close family members and a small number of staff who had been part of the coronation journey. The contrast between the two events perfectly illustrated how the royal family's approach had evolved over the year. During the service, Charles spoke without prepared remarks about the unexpected lessons of his first year as king. His words, though delivered to a small audience, captured the essence of the transformation that had taken place. A year ago, I feared that wearing the crown meant bearing its weight alone. I have learned instead that true kingship is about sharing that weight with those who love and support you, and finding strength in vulnerability rather than weakness in admission of need. William listened to his father's words with a sense of profound satisfaction, not because of any role he had played in the transformation, but because he had witnessed a man he loved finally step fully into his destiny. The hesitation and self-doubt that had occasionally clouded Charles's demeanor in earlier years had been replaced by a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from within. The impact of their changed relationship had rippled outward in ways that continued to surprise royal observers. International leaders had begun to comment privately on the effectiveness of King Charles's diplomatic style, noting that his combination of formal dignity and emotional authenticity created a unique approach to statecraft. During a state visit to Germany in March 2024, Chancellor Scholz had remarked that Charles's willingness to speak personally about his own experiences with loss and renewal had opened doors for deeper conversations about European cooperation and shared challenges. William's role in these diplomatic successes was often subtle but significant. His presence at key meetings provided a generational bridge that helped connect traditional monarchical values with contemporary concerns. Foreign diplomats noted that the obvious mutual respect and warm relationship between father and son created an atmosphere of stability and continuity that enhanced Britain's soft power on the international stage. The domestic impact was equally profound. Public opinion polling consistently showed that the monarchy's approval ratings had reached levels not seen since the early years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. More importantly, the demographic breakdown of this support showed significant gains among younger voters and those who had previously been skeptical about the institution's relevance in modern society. These shifts weren't merely about personal popularity, but reflected a deeper change in how the monarchy was perceived. The royal family was no longer seen as remote figures bound by rigid protocol, but as relatable people who could experience genuine emotion while still maintaining the dignity their roles required. This balance had become the defining characteristic of what historians were already beginning to call the Charles III style of monarchy. The influence on the next generation was perhaps the most significant long-term impact of the transformation. Prince George, now 10 years old, had begun to show a mature understanding of his future role that impressed both his parents and his grandfather. During a private conversation with his father in the autumn of 2024, George had asked thoughtful questions about the responsibilities of kingship that demonstrated he was processing the example set by his grandfather's successful first year on the throne. "Will I be a good king like Grandpapa?" George had asked William during one of their walks around the Sandringham estate. William's response, shared later with Catherine and Charles, had been telling. "Grandpapa is a good king because he learned to be himself while serving others. If you can do the same, you'll be everything your people need you to be." Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, though younger, were also absorbing the lessons of their grandfather's approach to royal duty. Palace staff noticed that all three children seemed more comfortable with their royal identity than might have been expected, displaying neither the rebelliousness that had sometimes characterized royal children in previous generations, nor the rigid formality that had marked earlier approaches to royal education. Catherine's role in supporting this family transformation had been crucial, but characteristically understated. Her steady influence had provided the foundation that allowed William to act with such emotional confidence during the coronation moment, and her continued support had helped both men navigate the complex process of redefining their relationship while maintaining their public responsibilities. The professional partnership between Charles and William had evolved into something approaching co-leadership in certain areas. The king had begun delegating significant responsibilities to his heir, not as preparation for future duties, but as recognition of William's current capabilities and insights. This collaborative approach had proven particularly effective in areas where generational perspectives added value to royal engagement. Environmental initiatives had become a particular focus of their joint efforts. Charles's decades of environmental advocacy combined with William's fresh perspective on climate challenges had created a powerful platform for royal leadership on one of the defining issues of the era. Their joint appearances at climate conferences and environmental summits had garnered international attention and had positioned the British monarchy as a significant voice in global environmental discussions. The economic impact of the monarchy's increased popularity had been substantial as well. Tourism figures showed significant increases in visits to royal residences and historic sites, with tour guides reporting that visitors frequently asked about the balcony moment and expressed interest in learning more about the current royal family. The Charles and William effect had become a recognized phenomenon in British tourism marketing. Cultural impact extended far beyond tourism, however. The royal family's more emotionally open approach had influenced broader discussions about masculinity, family relationships, and emotional intelligence in British society. Academic studies began examining what they termed the Windsor model of combining traditional authority with emotional authenticity, with applications being explored in corporate leadership, educational settings, and family therapy. International royal families had also taken note of the British transformation. Private correspondence between European royal houses, later revealed through diplomatic channels, showed significant interest in how the British royals had managed to modernize their approach without losing their essential dignity or authority. Several other monarchies began experimenting with more emotionally open public engagements, though none achieved quite the same balance of authenticity and formality. As Christmas 2024 approached, marking Charles's second Christmas as king, the contrast with his first year was striking. Where there had once been uncertainty about his ability to fill his mother's shoes, there was now confidence in his own distinctive style of kingship. Where there had once been formal distance between father and son, there was now a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The Christmas Day service at Sandringham that year provided another opportunity for public observation of the family's evolution. As they walked to church together, Charles and William were joined by George, who walked between his father and grandfather with obvious comfort and pride. The three generations together created a powerful image of continuity and renewal that captured the essence of what the monarchy had become under Charles's leadership. During his Christmas broadcast, Charles reflected on the unexpected joys of his second year as king. I have discovered that leadership is not about having all the answers, but about being willing to seek wisdom from those around you, particularly from those who know you best and love you most. The crown I wear belongs not to me alone, but to the nation I serve and the family that supports me. As 2025 began, both Charles and William looked toward the future with confidence and optimism that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The spontaneous gesture on the coronation balcony had catalyzed changes that transformed not just their relationship, but their understanding of what monarchy could be in a modern world. The legacy of that moment would extend far beyond their own lives and reigns. It had established a new template for royal behavior that emphasized authenticity without sacrificing dignity, emotional intelligence without abandoning protocol, and family support as a source of strength rather than a private matter to be hidden from public view. Future historians would mark the coronation balcony moment as a turning point not just in the reign of Charles III, but in the evolution of constitutional monarchy itself. It had proven that institutions could change and grow without losing their essential character, and that the most powerful moments in public life often came not from grand gestures or scripted ceremonies, but from simple acts of love between people who cared deeply about each other and the responsibilities they shared. The crown that Charles wore was no longer just a symbol of inherited authority, but a trust shared between generations, supported by love and strengthened by the understanding that true leadership came not from standing alone at the pinnacle of power, but from building bridges of understanding and support that could sustain the institution for generations to come.